I'm going to call it a night. And just like that, James and I were alone. There was nothing unusual about that at first. He leaned back into the living room couch with a soft sigh, wine glass resting between his fingers, and I sat in the armchair across from him. The fire was down to embers, casting a warm orange flicker over his face and the bookshelves behind him. A comfortable silence stretched between us, broken only by the occasional creak of the old house and the distant sound of a train somewhere far off in the night. We talked, at first, about safe things, how work was going for him, what I'd been reading lately, Mark's new fascination with composting. And then something shifted, subtle and slow, like the way twilight becomes night without anyone noticing. He mentioned how much he missed the warmth of conversation, how quiet his place had become since his mother passed. I felt something stir in me. Not attraction, not yet, but a recognition, a mirrored loneliness. Our son had moved out the year before, and Mark and I had slowly slipped into a rhythm of parallel lives, comfortable but distant. James's words reached into some small hollow part of me I hadn't realized was still aching. I always feel like I'm intruding when I stay late, he said, voice low. You're not, I replied, maybe a little too quickly. It's nice having someone to talk to like this. He looked at me then, really looked, eyes steady, kind, searching for something beneath the surface. And I felt my breath catch, not from fear or confusion, but from the intimacy of being seen in a way I hadn't in so long. The silence grew deeper, but it wasn't awkward. It felt full, charged even. I noticed how his shoulders were no longer tense, how his fingers tapped gently on the stem of the glass. I reached for the bottle on the coffee table and poured him another splash, then topped off my own. Remember that camping trip you and Mark dragged me on when the raccoon stole our breakfast? That memory made me laugh, loud and real, and I leaned back, letting the joy settle on my chest. He chuckled too, and for a moment we were younger, simpler, laughing under a pine canopy with stars overhead. It was the first time in years I felt like I belonged, he said softly, and something in the way he said it made me put my glass down. There was a quiet beat between us. I suddenly became aware of the distance between my chair and the couch, the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the fact that Mark was just upstairs, probably fast asleep. You've always belonged, James, I said, but my voice trembled more than I meant it to. He shifted forward, elbows on his knees. I don't mean with Mark. I mean with you. The room seemed to shrink. The fire hissed softly. My skin prickled as if a breeze had passed through, though the windows were closed. I didn't plan to say that, he added quickly. And I know this is complicated, but I've carried it for a long time. You're kind and smart, and you see people. You see me. And that matters more than you probably know. My heart beat fast, erratic in my chest. I didn't move, didn't speak for a moment. The emotions swirling in me were so unexpected, flattering, terrifying, and strangely affirming all at once. There was no offense in his tone, no pressure, just truth, a vulnerability that hung in the air like mist. I don't know what to say, I whispered. You don't have to say anything, he said. I just needed to say it out loud once. My voice was quiet, measured. And now that you have. I feel lighter, he admitted, but also afraid, because it changes nothing, and everything. I walked over slowly and sat beside him on the couch. We didn't touch. We just sat, side by side, the warmth of his presence close enough to feel. The moment was suspended, timeless, impossible to fully explain. I looked at him, really looked, and in his eyes, I saw not a man trying to steal affection or create chaos, but someone seeking connection, someone lonely, like me. "I don't know what any of this means," I said honestly. "Neither do I," he replied. And still we sat there, the quiet night pressing in around us, the world outside unaware of the small storm inside my chest. When he finally stood to leave, he didn't ask for anything. Not a promise, not a reply. Just one last look, and a thank you, spoken so softly I barely caught it. After the door clicked shut behind him, I stayed there on the couch, staring into the fire until the embers gave up their last flicker. Something had shifted in me, something I wasn't ready to name yet. But it was there, and it was real. And sleep, when it finally came, was shallow and full of dreams I wouldn't quite remember, but would feel all day long. The morning light poured through the kitchen window, casting long golden lines across the floor as I stood barefoot with my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. The house was silent, except for the rhythmic ticking of the old wall clock and the occasional chirp of a bird outside. Mark was still asleep upstairs. I hadn't told him that James stayed so late, not because I was hiding anything, but because I didn't know how to explain what had happened. I didn't even know how to explain it to myself. The night before kept playing in my mind like a soft song I couldn't get out of my head. There was no kiss, no touching, just words, presence, vulnerability. But somehow that made it more intimate than anything physical. James had reached into a part of me I had kept quietly tucked away for years, somewhere between motherhood, marriage, and the slow erosion of being truly seen. I cleaned up the few remaining glasses and folded the throw blanket from the couch, pretending it was just another Saturday morning. But every now and then I'd pause, my fingers hovering over an empty wine glass or brushing the edge of the cushion where he sat. I could still feel the warmth of that moment lingering. Later that afternoon, I found myself at the farmer's market. Mark decided to stay home, said he had emails to catch up on. I welcomed the space. Walking among the fresh produce, the smell of herbs and baked bread drifting through the air, I let the noise of the world wrap around me like armor. I picked up a bunch of lavender. It reminded me of the scent James always wore, something earthy and old-fashioned, like cedar, and something faintly sweet underneath. I didn't expect to see him there. He was standing by a honey vendor, holding a small jar up to the light. Our eyes met, and for a moment we just stared, not out of shock, but recognition. He smiled, a little cautious, and I felt my breath catch again. I walked over slowly. Neither of us said anything right away. It was the kind of silence that speaks more than words. "Hi," I said finally. "Hi," he echoed. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Me either," I replied. "But maybe it's good that I did." He nodded, gently setting the jar down. "I thought about last night all morning. I hope I didn't overstep." "You didn't?" I said, and I meant it. But it did make me think. He tilted his head. "About what?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wasn't sure I should say it. About what I've been missing. About how long it's been since someone looked at me like I mattered. James didn't flinch. "You do matter. You always have." His voice was so steady, it made something inside me shake. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear those words from someone who wasn't just being polite. Someone who saw past the roles I'd played, wife, mother, hostess, and saw the woman beneath all of that. We walked together for a while, not touching, just wandering among the stalls. We talked about silly things, the taste of heirloom tomatoes, how unpredictable Georgia spring weather could be, a song playing faintly from a nearby booth. Every now and then, our hands would brush as we reached for something at the same time. Each time it happened, a flicker of something passed between us, something neither of us named. "I should go," I said eventually, the weight of reality pressing gently on my shoulders. "Mark's probably wondering where I am." He nodded, but I saw the disappointment in his eyes. Not desperate, not clingy, just human. "Of course." I turned to leave, but before I could take a step, he said my name, softly, like a secret. I turned back. "If things were different," he said, not finishing the thought. "I know," I said, "but they aren't." He nodded, and we stood there for a breath too long before I walked away. Back home, Mark was still on the couch, laptop open, half watching some documentary. He barely looked up when I came in. "Get everything you needed?" he asked. "Mostly," I replied, setting the bags down. I watched him for a moment. The man I'd shared 23 years of my life with. The man who once memorized my favorite songs and surprised me with handwritten notes in my purse. The man who now barely noticed when I left for hours. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, James's voice echoing in my head. "You do matter." I knew nothing could happen. Not really. I wasn't ready to throw away everything I had built over a moment of emotional vulnerability. But still, I couldn't pretend that what happened didn't matter, that it hadn't opened something in me. A longing, a question, a truth I couldn't ignore anymore. I got out of bed quietly and went downstairs, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders and settling into the same couch from the night before. The embers were cold now, but I could still feel the warmth from the memory. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself sit with the feeling of being wanted, not for what I do or who I'm married to, but simply for who I am, even if only for a moment. The days that followed were quiet, almost too quiet. I moved through them like I always did, laundry, groceries, replying to emails, but it all felt muffled, like someone had turned down the volume on my life. Even Mark didn't seem to notice the shift, or maybe he did, and chose not to mention it. That was how we handled change now. We moved past it like it wasn't there, hoping silence would smooth it over. But inside me, something was shifting. Not in a dramatic way. No rebellion. No wild urges. Just a slow awakening. It was as though someone had turned a mirror toward me, and for the first time in years, I was looking at my reflection not for flaws or gray hairs, but for the woman behind the eyes. The one I used to be before the years wore me down. I found myself checking my phone more than usual. Not to call James. Not yet. But I wondered if he would text. He didn't. And I didn't either. It was safer that way. But every time it buzzed, I felt my chest tighten with the ridiculous hope that maybe, just maybe, it was him. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon, the message came. "Hey, I hope this isn't too forward. I just wanted to say I've been thinking about you. No pressure to respond." I stared at the words for a long time, the screen glowing against my hand. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I could delete it. Pretend I never saw it. But I didn't want to. "Thank you," I finally replied. "I've been thinking about you too." The moment I pressed send, a strange calm settled over me. Not regret. Not guilt. Just truth. And that truth felt like a deep breath after holding one for years. He didn't reply right away. Hours passed. I made dinner. Mark and I ate in near silence, each absorbed in our own thoughts. Later, as we sat watching a movie, I felt my phone vibrate beside me. "Would you meet me?" just to talk, somewhere public. I'd like to see you. I read the message twice, then glanced at Mark. He was half asleep, his head nodding forward slightly as the television flickered across his face. I looked back at the message. Yes, tomorrow morning, the park. The next day was bright and crisp, the kind of early spring morning that makes the sky seem wider somehow. I arrived first, sitting on the bench beneath the sycamore tree, the one where leaves always scattered like confetti in October. I watched joggers pass, couples walking their dogs, and children laughing in the distance. When James arrived, he looked different. Not dramatically, just lighter. His eyes found mine immediately, and I stood before I realized I had. "Hi," he said, that familiar warmth in his voice. "Hi." He sat beside me, close enough to feel the warmth of his coat, but far enough to still be respectful. That space between us felt sacred. "I didn't know if you'd come," he said. Neither did I. A soft breeze moved through the trees, and the silence stretched again, that same full silence that had hung between us in my living room. "I'm not here to complicate your life," he said quietly. "I just didn't want the last time to be the last time." "I understand," I said, "and I'm not sure what this is either. I'm not trying to escape my life, but I can't pretend I didn't feel something." He turned toward me, eyes gentle but steady. "You deserve to feel everything. To be seen, heard, loved, not just tolerated." The words hit me like a wave. Not because Mark didn't care. I knew he did, in his own way. But it had become a quiet kind of love, more habit than feeling. James' words were a reminder that love, real love, wasn't meant to be so quiet. We talked for nearly an hour, about nothing and everything. Old memories, future fears, how strange it felt to want something that couldn't belong to you. Before we parted, he touched my hand briefly, just a brush of his fingers across mine. It was the most tender gesture I'd felt in years. No expectation, just connection. That night, I couldn't bring myself to tell Mark where I'd been. I wanted to. I even rehearsed the words in my head. But how could I explain it? That I had met someone who made me feel alive again. That I hadn't done anything wrong, yet something inside me had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. And that's when I realized this wasn't about James. It was about me. About the part of me I had buried under years of caregiving and routine. About the woman who still longed for affection, for depth, for a conversation that made her feel more than useful. About the part of me that wasn't done being desired, noticed, cherished. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror that night, staring into my own eyes. I looked older than I felt. Tired, yes. But beneath that, I saw something flickering back to life. Something that hadn't quite died. A spark. And maybe, just maybe, that spark was worth paying attention to. The following weekend, Mark and I were invited to a neighbor's barbecue. One of those community things where the food is average, the conversation is polite, and the air smells like charcoal and cut grass. I'd put on a sundress I hadn't worn in a while. Something about it made me feel present, not invisible. Mark noticed, I think. He smiled and told me I looked nice, but the words felt like something he was supposed to say, not something he felt. Still, I appreciated it. As we mingled with familiar faces, I caught myself scanning the crowd, half expecting James to appear even though I knew he wouldn't. He didn't move in this circle. He had always been the quiet one on the edge, invited, but never fully woven into the fabric. Later that night, after the dishes were put away, and Mark had dozed off in front of the TV again, I went outside and sat on the back porch. The wind was picking up, warm and gentle, whispering through the trees. I closed my eyes and let the night wrap around me. I wasn't expecting the message. I've decided to move. I think I need to start fresh. Somewhere quiet, slower. I just wanted you to know. My heart fluttered and sank at the same time. I stared at the screen, unsure whether to cry or smile, or just sit with the ache in my chest. I typed back slowly. I understand. I think you're doing what you need. I'll miss you. His reply came after a long pause. I'll miss you too, more than you know. But I'll carry you with me. Always. I set the phone down gently on the patio table. The tears came then, quiet, steady, not from loss but from release. I let them fall, and with each one I felt lighter. James had stirred something in me, yes, but he didn't break my marriage. He didn't ruin anything. What he gave me was a gift, the courage to see myself again, to want more from my days than just getting through them. In the days that followed, I started taking walks again, long ones. I joined a book club at the library. I bought a journal and began writing in the mornings, letting my thoughts spill out without shame or filter. And slowly, quietly, I began inviting Mark into that space. I asked him one night if we could eat dinner without the TV, just talk. He looked surprised, but he agreed. We talked about little things at first, the garden, the neighbors, the dog barking next door. But over time, our conversations deepened. I told him how I'd been feeling, unseen, unheard. And to my surprise, he didn't argue. He listened. He said he'd been feeling it too, that we had become more like roommates than soulmates, that he missed us but didn't know how to fix it. So we started trying. Not perfectly, but honestly. James and I never saw each other again. And maybe that's the way it was supposed to be. Some people come into your life not to stay, but to awaken something inside you. He didn't steal my heart. He reminded me I had one. And for that, I will always be grateful. Sometimes I still sit on the back porch and think of him. Not with longing, but with peace. I wonder if he found what he was looking for, somewhere quiet and slow. I hope he did. As for me, I found something too. Not a man, not a romance, but a truth that even after years of routine and silence, it's never too late to remember who you are and to fight for the life that sees you clearly. I went back inside that night and turned off the lights. Mark stirred from his sleep and smiled up at me, eyes soft with something familiar, something I hadn't seen in a long time. And in that moment I knew the story wasn't over. Not yet.